ecological projects from all kinds of investments and developments in green technology, generations of green energy, but also the amount of forestry in the cities. That's what I'm very impressed with. But I'm very curious what's your general sense and impression of China is.
Well, that's a very big question, but I don't think of I mean there's the old question of whether China is socialist or capitalist, or whether you want to call it state capitalist or market socialism. I think I think is China today is something unique, that it's really a hybrid, but it's more complex than that. It's socialist led, and they have a kind of planning. They don't always call it that, but they have planning that is missing in the rest of the capitalist world. They have a connection between the Communist Party and the population, which is actually tighter and in many ways more democratic than what you have in the so-called democratic countries in the world, where there's no where the parties are just voting machines and nothing more than that. So China is very different, and I think that it's very successful. It offers hope to people, and it's really got the support of its population. Ecologically, they're very impressive. Now the biggest problem ecologically is they're still 60% dependent on coal as their energy source, but that's been going back down fairly rapidly, and they're the leaders in alternative energy in the world. They're the leaders in almost every environmental category that you can conceive of. They're now actually reducing their emissions, their carbon emissions. They're the leaders in reforestation and afforestation. They've done more to reduce pollution rapidly than any other country. So on all the environmental indicators, they offer hope where other countries don't. And it's I mean, certainly the core of the capitalist world does not offer much hope in these areas. In the United States, they've withdrawn from the Paris Agreement, but China is moving in these areas very fast. Their whole notion of ecological civilization arose out of socialism and is inconceivable outside of a society that's on a path, consciously on a path towards socialism. And there's a tendency on some parts of the left in the global north now to refer to China as imperialist. But of course, it's hard to make a case for that. They haven't been involved in wars except on their own borders for well, as far back as you can conceive, and they're allying themselves with the global South through the Belt and Road Initiative, and in other ways. They're the leaders in terms of proposals for global peace. I think that China has got a lot of things that hold out hope for the world. There's lots of contradictions in China. There's a lot of inequality in China, and so on. But it seems like China's addressing these issues now, while other countries are doing the exact opposite. So I have hope there, and especially the notion of ecological civilization, defining socialism in terms of ecological civilization and a beautiful China. Xi says that mountains of green are more important ultimately than mountains of gold. And who else is saying that? I think this is very important.
And China's ecological story is particularly more impressive if one remembers that not until very long in recent history, it had all kinds of bad parameters in every kind of ecological indicators. I mean, it's not the West where you had clean air relatively, green fields, urban cities are much cleaner, etc. China was not that. It was a typical global south ecology. I'm not sure if your time permits for my specific question that I had in mind.
I'm fine time
All
wise.
right. Okay. So, yeah. So this is what I actually intended to ask you on China. Given your work on monopoly capital, China, to my mind, seems very interesting in the sense that it has the classic 19th century terrain of multiple players, private players competing against each other, having the tendency to cut down on profits, leading to all kinds of problems that perhaps Marx was thinking about, introduction of technology, deep throat competition, sometimes even falling rate of profit. So that's on one hand, against which Swissy and Baran kind of came up with big monopoly capital. But at the same time, in China, we are looking at these giant platforms. And I just got back from China. I spoke to multiple people, some which are party members, very close to lower rung officials within the provincial cadre. And they've been very critical about some of this platform, blocks of capital, Tencent, Alibaba, and so on, and the conditions of working class within that. Um, I wonder, as someone who has contributed so much to monopoly capital, both theoretically but also just looking at these giant blocks of capital, uh, what are your thoughts about the rise of big blocks of capital in China?
Well, it's a difficult problem. I mean, to what extent does monopoly?
Of course, the state is extremely, extremely powerful. So I'm not making the case that the state has been politically hijacked by these big blocks of capital. Nevertheless, they have emerged as very giant blocks of capital.
Yeah, I think that's true, and it's a worrisome development in terms of if you believe in that socialism is about equality and democracy. How does that fit with these big blocks of capital? I think one thing is that the big blocks of capital, at least initially, emerged around export industry, and China was more relaxed about concentration of capital and allowing severe exploitation of workers, particularly migrant workers, within the export industry, and part of that was a calculated move to get Western technology. At one point, they were swapping technology from corporations for swapping technology for access to the Chinese market with its incredibly low unit labor costs and developed infrastructure. So the profits for foreign corporations, multinational corporations, of producing in China were just enormous. And China used its leverage to get technology, but part of that was supplying migrant labor from the rural areas and allowing them to be paid uh, wages that were really so low that it was kind of a super exploitation. Mainly people in their 20s and 30s, and then they went back to the rural areas. So there was some sort of safeguard, but and they lived in dormitories, really terrible situation, but it was a calculated move to try to develop the state. Now, the question is, how much do they move away from that model in the export sector? But that created a lot of big capital. Now there's a lot of big capital that's being formed around AI, and that's seen as a necessity. But the the difference in China, I mean, there are a lot of differences. For one thing, is the land in the rural areas is still socially owned, still collectively owned. There's a very big state sector within industry, which gives the state leverage
Also
over
finance.
capital as a whole. And yeah, and then the state controls finance, which is crucial for the Chinese political economy as it exists at present. If they let go of that, they'd lose they'd lose control to international capital. But one thing that Xi has done is he instituted anti-corruption on on a huge scale, and not just momentarily, but he says this has to go on permanently. The notion is that corruption within the corporations and even within the party, this had to be fought, and it's really um, they're fighting kind of corruption that would be not even be considered corruption in the West, but they're fighting people using their position and political access to make fortunes, and that's really important. They've kept control. They're really kind of keeping a control on the capitalist class by these massive um, um, moves in terms of corruption, and it's well, it's supported by the population. It's understood what corruption is, what this kind of economic corruption is taking from the society, and they're preventing that. So that makes it quite a bit different than what we're used to out, in the West or even in India, where corruption is rife, and you see billionaires in the West, and you know just how much corruption they've been involved in, and so there are and there's a kind of planning. The One of the things that's different in China that and people don't realize is the degree of decentralization in in fiscal matters, so that there is a lot that's controlled at the local level, but that's also where they have to often watch for corruption. So I'm hopeful, but yeah, if capital becomes too powerful in relation to the state or in relation to the party, if the party it seemed at one time that the party was just going in a capitalist direction, but it's certainly under Xi, and even before Xi, this was stopped. And I think that socialism with Chinese characteristics is a real phenomenon, and I'm impressed by the brilliance of the coordination going in taking place in China, the politics, the policies. I mean, if you read Xi's speeches, which are well worth reading, you see and other things coming out of Chinese government, but particularly his speeches, you see an organic development, an organic political development that is intrinsically socialist, is in charge and is flexible and is planning and is very strategic all the way along. So I I, as always, I always quote C. Wright Mills when he wrote "Listen, Yankees" about Cuba. He said, "I don't, I don't worry about the Cuban Revolution. I, I worry with it." And I think I don't worry about the Chinese Revolution. I worry with it, and I could say that about some other revolutions too, like the Venezuelan Revolution. But I think I I I still think that China is is struggling to stay intact, and there's so many things that are happening there that are good. But we have to be critical, and we have to be aware of contradictions, and we have to be aware of that things could go another way if we're not smart, if we don't, if we, if you don't, they don't talk about class in China much, but I'm sure Xi and the leadership of the Communist Party of China are very aware of the class relations and how they have a very narrow course to steer if they're going to reach the mature socialist society that they're aiming at.
We'll leave it there, Professor Foster. This was a wonderful conversation, and thank you so much for your generous time and insightful analysis.
Well, thank you for having me. It's an honor